Now that I'm a replacement for Steve, I'm reminded of an interesting story. I guess I should entertain you with it. Woodrow Wilson, when he was governor of Princeton, got a call in the middle of the night. It was 3 o'clock, and someone said, Governor, there's someone who must talk to you. The governor said, at 3 o'clock, what could be that urgent? The fellow gets on the phone, and he said, Governor, I want you to know that the person who had been heading up your Department of Transportation passed away. The governor said, oh, I'm terribly sorry to hear that. Please send my condolences to the family. And he said, well, that's not all, Governor. I want you to know that I would very much like to take his position. Governor Wilson thought for a moment and said, if it's okay with the undertaker, it's okay with me. So much for replacements. Now, the other interesting thought I had in thinking about this position that I have today is that there are 3 important lessons that I've been told in life. One is never climb a wall that leans towards you. The second is never kiss a woman that leans away from you. And the third is never speak after Bruce Cole is given an award. Now, I have nothing at all to do with the order of these events, but I am very privileged to talk about Peter Shaw and this award today. For Peter was my closest friend. And not only was Peter my closest friend, Peter was someone I admired tremendously for his exemplary writing about higher education and a variety of other themes as well. He was, in many respects, one of the inspirations for this organization. I can remember the time in the mid-1980s when the redoubtable Steve Balch and Barry Gross and Peter Shaw and yours truly met in a restaurant in Greenwich Village. We had the idea of creating an organization like this called the Campus Coalition for Democracy. It had a distinctly left-wing orientation, or at least it seemed that way. In any case, we worked very hard on trying to get this organized and had the good sense to appoint Steve as our leader. But there was no question that one of the great inspirations for this organization was Peter Shaw. And it's quite appropriate that the Peter Shaw Award is given on this occasion, and is also given to a man of extraordinary accomplishment, Victor Davis Hanson. Victor Davis Hanson needs no introduction. But I remember Henry Kissinger once saying to me when I introduced him, Herb, I know I need no introduction, but I so love to hear it. And so let me tell you about Victor Davis Hanson, although some of you know a great deal about him. You've probably read his articles and listened to his extraordinary speech yesterday. Victor Davis Hanson was born in 1953 in Fowler, California. He is, as some of you know, a military historian, a columnist, a political essayist, and a former classics professor, notable as a scholar on ancient warfare. He has been a commentator on modern warfare and contemporary politics for National Review and other media outlets, and has been a strong supporter of the policies of President George W. Bush. Hanson was awarded the National Humanities Medal in 2007 and the Bradley Prize for the Lynd and Harry Bradley Foundation in 2008. Hanson is also, as he pointed out in yesterday's speech, a farmer, growing raisin grapes on a family farm near Fresno, California, and as a critic of social trends related to farming and agrarianism in the United States. In 1991, Hanson was awarded an American Philological Association Excellence in Teaching Award, which is awarded to undergraduate teachers of Greek and Latin. He has been a visiting professor of classics at Stanford University, the National Endowment Humanities Fellow at the Center for Advanced Studies in the Behavioral Sciences in Stanford, as well as holding the visiting chaperone chair of military history at the U.S. Naval Academy, and he is also a visiting professor at Hillsdale College and has been in 2004, 2006, and 2007. Hanson is perhaps best known for his 2001 book, Carnage and Culture, in which he argued that the military dominance of Western civilization, beginning with the ancient Greeks, is a result of certain fundamental aspects of Western culture, such as consensual government and individualism. Hanson rejects racial explanations for the military preeminence and disagrees as well with environmental or geographical explanations such as put forth by Jared Diamond in Guns, Germs, and Steel. According to Hanson, Western values such as political freedom, capitalism, individualism, democracy, scientific inquiry, rationalism, and open debate form an especially lethal combination when applied to warfare. Non-Western societies can win the occasional victory when warring against a society with these Western values, writes Hanson, but the Western way of war will prevail in the long run. But we are not only here to talk about his work as a military historian. Hanson co-authored the book Who Killed Homer with John Heath. This book explores the issues of how classical education has declined in America and what might be done to restore it to its former place. This is important, according to Hanson, because knowledge of the classical Greeks and Romans is necessary if we are to fully understand our own culture. Hanson blames the academic classes themselves for the decline, accusing them of becoming so infected with political correctness and postmodern thinking, not to mention, again, and money-grabbing grants, visiting professorships, conference hopping, and promotion based on unreadable publications, that they have lost sight of what it feels to really represent the classics effectively. Well, here is someone who represents the classics effectively, who has written exemplary works in higher education, and is a true Renaissance man. I give you Victor Davis Hanson and this Peter Shaw Award.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I guess I, like Henry Kissinger, didn't object to it. I know I won't speak at length because I think most people have had enough of me. I've spoke too long yesterday. But I would say that I didn't know Peter Shaw, but Stephen was kind enough to send me the memorial issue, which I read from cover to cover, and I've been trying to read some of his essays. And what I took away with it is that it seems that we as conservatives who carry the burden of what might be called the tragic realization that human nature is unchanging can be dour and angry sometimes at what we see in modernism. So his example to me seems how to be very upbeat when your message is not necessarily optimistic all the time. And that's also superior to a lot of people who are upbeat and kind, and yet their writing lacks substance. In other words, they're wishy-washy, or they triangulate as much in writing as they do in person. And I don't think that Peter Shaw did, and from what I can tell, he had a pleasant personality and a firm message, and that seems to be a model we should emulate. I would just finish by saying that I think right now we're all, those who are scholars, professors, academics, and perhaps moderate to conservative, are sort of bewildered by the last election because we've been presented with a false dichotomy of Palinism as conservative populism that's been characterized by some as know-nothingism, anti-intellectualism, and we had many in the conservative movement, ranging from David Frum, David Brooks, Kathleen Parker, Peggy Noonan, who were offended by the obvious inexperience on foreign affairs that Sarah Palin exhibited. All I could say in her defense is it's not an easy thing to be in Alaska and Wasilla for 16 years and to have 5 children and to make it to the mayor of Alaska, the governorship of Alaska, and take on the infrastructure she did. And it reminded me of a larger truth. I was given a great gift to grow up on a farm. It had been my family 6 generations, and parents who were educated but were farmers first. I can remember my mother, who was a Stanford Law graduate in 1947 and was the first woman appellate court judge in the San Joaquin Valley, second in the state, going over with me in a used telephone van that we bought for $1,500 when she was 60 years old to peddle grapes, until she was embarrassed when somebody said, "Judge Hanson, what are you doing? Peddling things." But it reminded me that when I was younger and when I returned to the farm, that there were messages there that could not be conveyed necessarily just through intellectualism. When I lost a crop in 1984, I had done everything right, everything. Thinned the plum trees, fertilized them, and then the day before I was to pick, it hailed and ruined the entire crop, 4 acres. It was nobody's fault. There was nobody to blame. That was a tragic way that things happen. And instead, I learned from my parents and grandparents how to endure that reality, not by blaming somebody, but showing dignity in defeat that wasn't your own fault. And the second message I think I learned was that there was a difference between shame and guilt. That it was easy to feel guilty, but it really didn't have much deterrent value on your behavior. But once, when the prices got low, I decided not to use ammonium nitrate nor calcium nitrate nor any fertilizer, thinking that I'd fertilize every year. And so when it came time to lay your raisin trays down the row, it was an obvious referendum on your skill. And when I had half of what my neighbors had, I was shamed to death and never tried that again. So I learned that shame was much more powerful catalyst for good behavior than guilt. And then when we put in an orchard, I was always fascinated that when you have wild Mariana root on plum trees, it won't grow anything. It's a wild, gnarly, savage tree. And yet, if you want a Santa Rosa plum, Luther Burbank's cultivar, it won't grow on its own root. It's too weak. It's too refined. But through the mystery of the Greeks' discovery of grafting, where you could take this cultivar and you could put it on the wild root, the root bore no fruit, the fruit had no root. You put them together and you saw the popular, accepted, and successful combination of nature and culture. All that was refined and poorly thought out. When I became a classicist and studied at Stanford, I noticed that, lo and behold, the message of Hesiod's Works and Days was shame was in fact a more powerful, coercive element than guilt. I noticed that the same was true in Aristophanes. Euripides' Bacchae taught us about the proper and perilous balance between nature and culture. And through all of Greek literature, there was this tragic rather than therapeutic view. And I think we have to remember that message, that as conservatives and moderates, that where we have to have an abstract message and refine it, there are millions of people out there who have a conservative experience each day that we have to appreciate in a non-traditional way. I'll just finish with a thought that I once picked peaches quite a lot, and a man with 70 pounds of peaches on his back would go up and down a ladder, and he got about $8 an hour, and he'd say to me, the guy that owns this corporate orchard, how much do you think he makes? And I said, about $7,000 an hour. And he said, that's not fair. I said, no, it's not fair. And I said, but you have to realize that this is tragic, and that if he were to pay you $7,000 an hour, you wouldn't have a job, and he wouldn't have a job. But at the same time, I met that man, and he was telling me why he was so successful, and I tried to explain to him that what he paid was a fair price, but he had to have some empathy because he'd never had 70 pounds and gone up and down that ladder. And so for all of the easy characters of Sarah Palin, I think that we have to realize that she had a conservatism and a life story that can't be easily neglected, and it has some value and a reminder for us, especially between the Washington-New York corridor. Thank you very much.